Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to another episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and this week it is raining red because we are going to be celebrating the 25th anniversary of Halloween 6, The Curse of Michael Myers. And I thought for this occasion, I needed to have the biggest Halloween 6 expert that I could possibly find. So for this week's episode, I am joined by none other than Anya Stanley, who you may have read in Fangoria. I know she's got some stuff coming up in Scream Horror Magazine. She's also in the recently released Scared Sacred book from House of Leaves. Anya, thank you so much for being here. I could not have done Halloween 6 without you.
Thank you for having me, Heather. I am so thrilled to be here, and I'm thrilled to be, standing the Cult of Thorn.
Yes. If anybody's going to represent Thorn, it's going to be you. And I also wanted to mention you're doing a lot of really cool stuff over at Crooked Marquee as well. So congratulations on everything you've got going on these days. I haven't been able to pick up Scared Sacred yet, but it is on my wish list on Amazon.
Thank you. Yes. So there's a lot going on. The way it is these days, you kind of have to be a jack of all trades, and you have to have your fingers in many different pots and write for many different outlets because staff positions aren't really a thing, so you got to get whatever you can when you can and do whatever you can to watch horror movies and write about them,
Yes. So as I mentioned, we are celebrating the 25th anniversary of Halloween 6, which, I don't think it's a secret that, it's one of the sequels that sort of gets a lot of flack from fans. But I do feel like the producer's cut has sort of reduced that a little bit, which we'll talk about, of course. But I'm just curious for you. So were you somebody who saw Halloween 6 in theaters? Was it something that you sort of experienced like for the first time on home video? Like where does your love of Thorn come from?
I believe that I saw it first. I don't think I saw it in theaters. I believe I saw it on video as a kid, 1995. So I would have been 9, but my mom was always the kind of person that just, if you're a good kid, if you're social, if you get all of your homework done on time, you have good grades, you could pretty much do what you want for the most part, within reason. And so I was able to watch horror movies and read scary stuff a little advanced for my age at a young age. I was able to do all that. And so at that age, I was able to see, The Curse of Michael Myers. And it certainly wasn't the first horror movie I had seen. And so I was able to watch that on video. And I remember thinking that it was really weird that they made it into a cult thing. And this was one of my first instances where I really encountered a cult plot within a movie. And the cut that I saw was a theatrical cut, but they kind of hint at at what they have in the producer's cut within the theatrical cut. So it was all very confusing to me. And because I was 9, I thought, this is amazing. I love this. And I didn't really critique it until I was an adult. But even now, I'm just at home with the cult aspect of most slasher movies and with cult movies in general. So I get that people don't like this sequel. The people are wrong. And I'm here to talk about it.
Excellent. So what's interesting to me, because I always kind of like to look at sort of like the social context of things. And I've always wondered, and I have never asked Dan Farron's this or not, but I'm just curious, like maybe in your perspective, do you feel like maybe sort of the rise or the sensationalism about the events that happened with the Branch Davidians in 1993, do you feel like that might have had any sort of influence on them taking this in a cult direction? Because I've always thought that was kind of interesting that like it does sort of kind of come out of nowhere. And yet, this is like a year, like when they would be writing the script, it was about a year removed from everything that happened in Texas. So I was always really kind of curious about sort of kind of drawing that line. I'm not sure if that's even a thing, if I'm making it up, but I always thought it was kind of interesting that, a lot of times horror movies sort of are a response to things that happen, in our world.
Mm-hmm. And that happens even subconsciously too. And I think it was actually a couple of years removed from maybe the Heaven's Gate thing too.
Heaven's Gate might have been a little later, I think.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, maybe it came through an osmosis. I do know that Farron's said I think in the commentary on the producer's cut of the film, I believe he said something like he was going for a Rosemary's Baby type of vibe, and that the paternity of the baby that you see in the movie was never to be definitively answered. Um, and that in doing the cult angle, he was trying to tie in the entire series altogether and answer the questions that were raised in the fifth film with the Man in Black, who they threw in there without really having a backstory for him. They were just like,
Yeah.
let's just put this in there. And so in doing that, he was trying to kind of cross his T's and dot his I's and kind of put a bow on everything and make it nice and neat. But I think you're onto something there. I think that he probably had, the Branch Davidians in mind, maybe through osmosis.
Yeah, it's interesting because and obviously we're going to talk about the different cuts of this movie because one sort of takes away the sort of weird, incestuous kind of undertones. I don't even think they're undertones; they're overtones. I think at that point. But for me, like because I was somebody who rented it as well, and it's got to be a tough thing for a writer when you're sort of backed into a corner that somebody else put you in
Mm-hmm.
and having to sort of find your way out of it. And you mentioned the Man in Black, and I think it's really interesting how in these two versions we kind of get to sort of. I think that's why I like the aspects of the producer's cut more because it really directly talks about, well, how did we get from that end of part 5 to part 6, where the regular cut is a little more ambiguous. Like,
Yeah.
because it's almost like, well, did Jamie get kidnapped and she was pregnant? Whereas in the producer's cut, we're like, oh no, she was taken that night and sort of swept, taken away. And like, did they just like wait it out till like she could get pregnant? Like it's very interesting. It's got to be a hell of a gig when you're a writer and you have to kind of like, sort of paint your way out of a situation like that. But I think ultimately I think again with the producers cut, I think they do a pretty good job of it. For the most part, in terms of being able to sort of give the Man in Black some purpose other than being cool and having cool boots.
Mm-hmm. He did have some cool boots. I got to get those boots. But yeah, it was cool in that he did what he could with what he was given. He was given the Man in Black. He was given those cool boots and a strange symbol on his wrist, and he blows up the jail. He's gone. Jamie is doing her thing by the end credits, and so I think it was cool that he tried to take it back to the original mythology, which is pagan in nature. I'm staring right now at the novelization of the first Halloween film. And
I'm totally not jealous at all, by the way.
I think a friend sent it to me at some point. But in the very first page, they say something along the lines of, they draw a pagan ritual parallel, and they talk about the pagan beginnings of the holiday Halloween, and they tie that to Michael Myers himself. And so I think it's really cool that Daniel Farrens actually looked at that and looked at those origins and said, maybe we could pull a whole movie out of this. And he did it. And I don't know, I respect it. I think it's cool because this was just a few years after Jason Goes to Hell. And that was after New Blood. This film had an ambition that paralleled the ambition of later entries of contemporary slashers of the time. Nightmare on Elm Street was already surrounding a dream realm that allowed for rule bending. Friday the 13th got a little weird with the telekinetic girl in the New Blood. And then they had Manhattan, which moved Jason away from Camp Crystal Lake. All of these franchises were kind of getting a little stale. And so they had to do stuff to freshen them up. And so even Nightmare on Elm Street, which takes place in a dream realm where you can do anything to anyone, that had grown stale enough that they had to move Freddy out of Elm Street in Freddy's Dead, The Final Nightmare. And that was before Halloween 6 as well. But Craven, Wes Craven, 1 year before Halloween 6, he busts the whole subgenre wide open with Wes Craven's New Nightmare. And then he follows that up with Scream in 1996, both of which were very meta films that kind of interrogated the structure of the slasher film. And so there was this really tight mid-90s window where slashers underwent a shift and looked at the structure and played with it. And Halloween 6 is right in the middle of that. You know, it's a relic of a franchise that really started it all. It wasn't the first slasher, but it was certainly the one that set the template for slashers moving forward. Friday the 13th picked up on that. They tried to ape it. They made bank at the box office. And between Halloween and Friday the 13th, it was off to the races as far as slasher structure. And so, you know, with Farron's trying to make that a little bit fresh, it was kind of in line with other slasher franchise sequels of the time.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you sort of brought that up because it really is sort of nestled right in there, right between New Nightmare and Scream. And it's, you know, what I appreciate about Halloween 6 is the fact that, like, you know, it is still a slasher. Like, it's not trying to prove that, you know, it's smarter than its audience. Like, it still gets the job done in a way that feels very in line with the Halloween series, which I do feel like maybe the producer's cut does it. Succeeds at that a little bit more because it feels more in line with like the pacing of a Halloween movie, where the regular cut just feels like it's in a really big rush all the time, where it's like, it's just going. But I think that's what I've always really liked about it, is the fact that, you know, in a time when slashers were starting to evolve, and we were seeing, you know, Freddy kind of, you know, being brought into reality, you know, Michael is still there, but he's doing something a little bit different, but still feels part of the Halloween universe. And I do appreciate how, you know, Farron sort of brought it back to this idea of the pagan rituals, because they even sort of toy with it in Halloween too. You know, when they go to the school and, like, you know, he writes, you know, Sam Hain on the board, you know, and then that just kind of went nowhere after that. So I do appreciate that, you know, ultimately I think Farron's found like this really interesting aspect to sort of kind of try to bring things full circle. And of course, you know, and a lot of that also comes with, you know, having the inclusion of Tommy Doyle as part of the story, and also bringing in the Strode family, which I've always appreciated as well.
Yeah. And there's for the listeners, there is a big difference between the theatrical and the producer's cut. If you haven't seen the producer's cut, that what had happened was they had done what we now know as the producer's cut. And then they tried to do some test screenings for audiences. It did not go well. And the same thing happened with Halloween 4. Test audiences saw Halloween 4. They didn't like what they saw. They thought it was boring. So the producers and Akkad and the like decided to add in more gore. And with that extra gore came, you know, some scenes that you all know and love, where, like, Michael Myers gouges out an EMT's eyes with his thumbs, you know, stuff like that. And so later on, this happened again. You know, the test screening didn't pan out very well, and so they decided to do reshoots. But in the time that they had done these test screenings, Donald Pleasence had passed away, the man who plays Dr. Loomis. So they had to work around his absence. And on top of that, they had to add more gore, or what they thought they needed to add, which was more gore, more death, faster pacing. And the result in the theatrical cut, what we now know as the theatrical cut, is a Halloween movie that kind of looks like an MTV music video. You know, it's there's a lot of strobes for some reason. There's green blood. There's a lot going on. I'm not a huge fan of it. I did like seeing Paul Rudd beat the shit out of Michael Myers with a pipe. That was cool. But beyond that, I'm just a bigger fan of the producer's cut overall.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you too. I think also, you know, for as dirty as the movie does Jamie, I mean, both cuts, you know, sort of, you know, we lose Jamie in both cuts, but I think at least in the producer's cut, we get more of a sense of, like, closure, whereas in the regular cut, it's a really unnecessarily brutal kill, I think.
The corn thresher? You don't like the corn thresher?
Oh my gosh, that poor girl. Like, she just gave birth, and, like, you know, and then she's, like, put on this machine, and then he's like, it's not even bad enough that, like, these things are, like, coming out of her stomach, but then he's like, he turns it on, and I was like, oh boy.
That's good stuff. I
think
for the readers who haven't seen the producer's cut, it's In the theatrical cut, Jamie dies. She's impaled on a corn thresher. But in the producer cut, oh, by the way, I'm not worried about spoilers because this movie came out in 19.
It's 25 years, guys. Like you've had time.
So chill, But yeah. But in the producer's cut, she dies on the corn thresher. In the theatrical cut, she is stabbed by Michael Myers, and then she's kind of in a coma. She's in a hospital, and later on, she's subsequently shot in the head while in the hospital by, I'm guessing it's Dr. Wynn that does it.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think Michael's using a silencer, so I would guess
he doesn't
Dr.
seem like
Wynn.
a silencer kind of guy.
It's a little too subtle, I think, for him. But yeah, I do like that also with her being in the hospital. And her being sort of in this, I guess, coma state, we do get some stuff filled in terms of what has exactly happened to her as well with this cult. For as weird and icky as it might be, we at least know that, what's been going on with her. Whereas the regular cut, like we just assume she's pregnant, and then she's dead. And and it's one of those, like, I do feel bad that Danielle Harris wasn't able to come back, because I know that they had all kinds of issues.
They wouldn't give her money.
Yeah. And like, she's Jamie, like pay her the money she wants. Like you guys are spending millions on this movie. Like how much could she have, it's not like she was asking for $1 million,
right?
Just pay her the money. But I do think, JC Brandy had a really tough thing coming in and having to sort of be this character that we've all sort of come to love in the first two movies. So I give her a lot of credit for coming in and trying to, do Jamie as best as she possibly can. And it's not the first time we've seen beloved characters from a franchise get recast. It's happened in Nightmare. It's happened in the Friday the 13th series. Like we had 3 different Tommies, so, I never, I never discount JC's sort of contribution to Halloween 6 either, because like she came in and she was offered a role, and of course she's going to take it, right. So, cause I've seen a lot of people saying, well, she's no Danielle Harris. Well, that's not fair to her. She's still in
a few minutes in the film too.
Exactly. And far few less minutes in the regular cut versus the producer's cut.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I do think one of my favorite sort of little weird details about Halloween 6 is how in the beginning, when she's making her escape, thanks to the nurse, and they're running through that hallway, and then Michael sort of catches up with the nurse. And I love that in that big, bleak, very, very minimal hallway, there's that one spike on the wall.
For no reason.
Like
other than to put that nurse right on it.
I know. And I was just like, for me, I'm like, how did the production designer just not like put a little couple extra things on the wall or something? But I just love how like, she runs by, you're like, oh, someone's going to get killed on that thing. Cause there's nothing else there. That's just an instrument of death, just waiting. Right. And of course it serves its purpose. But that's one of my favorite little details in that opening, where I'm just like, that just thing is just there to like, does Michael randomly like chase people down a hallway and impale them on this thing? Like, is that just the impaler?
And I'm wondering if that's like a throwback homage to the boyfriend in the first movie who gets impaled on the knife and he gets pinned to the wall.
Yeah.
I'm wondering if they were thinking of that when they decided, well, let's impale this nurse's skull on a spike, and just like, they could have put like a coat hanger there or something.
Just something to add a little dressing to it. They're like, no, we just want the spike.
Just put the spike there. We're giving you what you want. Is this what you wanted?
Yeah. Are you not entertained? So I want to talk about Paul Rudd in this movie because, first of all, I mean, who doesn't love Paul Rudd? He is a treasure. He's always been a treasure, I think. And I love the fact that, this was like this year that, in 1995, it was this and Clueless.
And you know what? In this movie, he is a neurotic little cinnamon bun, isn't he?
He is. Like, I still love that look that he gives when he's like carrying the baby in the hospital. And then he like, after he talks to Loomis and he runs away and he gives like this look like, I'm not doing anything weird. And he's just like, I was like, you're a grown man carrying an infant looking like a crazy person. Like, how did you walk out of that hospital? But it's so good. And I also, one of my other favorite moments is that when he locks eyes with Michael at the end.
Oh, when he's trying to bust
Kara out,
and he does that little like half laugh thing, that crazy laugh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that thing. They made it into a GIF at some point, and yeah, it's out of context it looks loony, but within the context of the movie, it's also loony. Like you could tell he's lost his marbles by that point.
Yeah. But the thing I think for me, because like I'm somebody who like when I get nervous or over anxious, I'll kind of laugh a little bit.
Yeah.
And so I actually find that moment to be really relatable because I think I would probably be like, oh my God, there's Michael Myers. And I might laugh a bit where most people would like call bullshit on that. And I'm like, no, I probably would be like, oh my God, like there's Michael Myers right in front of me, you know?
We all cope in different ways, that's what we do. And especially with horror fans, we tend to have like a weird kind of gallows humor with everything. A very inappropriate, the kind of person that would probably like giggle at a funeral,
Yeah.
But, have the decency to try to hide it.
Yeah, I'd like to pretend that I would be cool in these situations, but no, I probably would just fall apart.
Right.
I'd be like, all horror fans are always like, oh, I would totally survive this or that. And I was like, I don't have such an ego about myself. I'd be like, yeah, I'd probably be dead by the end of the first reel, to be really honest. Because I'd be like, I'd forget everything that I've ever learned in a horror movie. And I would be Paul Rudd and I'd be giggling and freaking out. So
I wouldn't be thinking straight. The cool thing about Tommy Doyle is that I watched the producer's cut and I listened to the audio commentary with screenwriter Daniel Ferens and composer Alan Howarth. And Ferens had said that if Halloween 6 was successful, he wanted Tommy Doyle to actually sort of become the foil and sort of pick up the baton where Dr. Loomis left off, and he would be the agent of good to Michael Myers, which is kind of cool when you consider the producer's cut that has Dr. Loomis, getting the mark of Thorn, and he's got to be sort of the guardian of Michael Myers. It's a really strange shift in dynamics, and I'm really curious about where that would have gone, and I'm kind of pining for the movie that could have been, the sequel that could have been.
No, I think that's a really interesting thing because, like, I think especially like if you look at like Halloween 5 and what Loomis sort of turns into in that movie, he's really overzealous at times. Like he's actually in some ways sort of scarier than Michael.
He's great,
yeah, and I really love that performance. Like I know the movie again is a little bit messy, but I always like appreciate Halloween 5 because of when we sort of a continuation of the relationship between Loomis and Jamie. But I think it really pushes Loomis into a very interesting direction where it's almost like, it's gone from his life work to his obsession. Mm-hmm. And it's a dangerous obsession to the point where there's moments in that movie where I'm legitimately terrified for Jamie because of the position that Loomis is putting this little girl in. Mm-hmm. And I think it's
mean to her. He was mean to that little girl. He was like, you need to talk.
Yeah. And he's like shaking her and he's like, and then he's going to set her up as bait.
Yeah. He was terrible.
Yeah. So I would have, unfortunately, poor Donald passed away after Halloween 6, but I would have loved to have sort of seen him become this thing that he ultimately would have never like Loomis in, part 1 and part 2 would have never wanted to become.
Right. He's sort of like the Captain Ahab to Michael Myers' Great White Whale. He's chasing this guy around for 5 films and basically telling anyone who will listen, like, this dude's evil. Like, you need to put this dog down. Like, he's bad. Like, there's no reforming this guy. And no one's listening to him. And then in this movie, he finally sort of catches him, but now Michael Myers is his ward. He's responsible for him. And what they imply with this mark of Thorn on his wrist at the end of the producer's cut is that he's compelled to take care of him. He doesn't have a choice in the matter, to where he can't just say no, and shoot him. He can't do it. So I'd be really interested to see where that would have went. But
yeah, but I think one of the reasons I love the producer's cut more is because we do get more Loomis than we get in the regular theatrical cut of the movie. And for me, and anytime you can add more Donald Pleasence into the mix, it's a good thing. But I think it just, for me, what I love about that is like, you just get more character stuff.
Yeah.
Where people just aren't like sort of the stereotypes. Cause if you look at like Kara's family, like they're all very stereotypical. Like you have like the asshole dad, the mom who's very meek and is afraid to like, speak up. You've got sort of her smart aleck brother.
Deborah Strode. That was the most hurtful death out of all of them. She did nothing wrong. This
I
woman.
know. And of course she's played, by Kim Darby, who, a lot of fans will probably recognize from, she was in, oh gosh, I am totally
What was she?
blanking.
Her face is familiar, but I don't think I Googled it. What is she in?
Oh, I thought she was in, I always thought she was in Are You Afraid of the Dark, but that's just wrong.
Probably. Everybody in
she
the mom was in that show. Anyway, Kim Darby. Okay.
she was in Don't Be Afraid of the Dark. I was totally right. I was like, gosh, I felt like she was in that. But she was also in Better Off Dead too.
That's what I'm thinking of. Yeah, Better Off Dead.
Yeah. So she had it rough in that movie because like she's married to this asshole drunk of a husband. She's just trying to do right and do her laundry, and Michael was just not having it.
Right. Her husband isn't. You know what he is. If that movie were made today, he'd have a little red hat on.
He would have a red hat.
He's whining about the kids having no respect. He's misogynist. He's violent towards women. If the movie were made today, there would be a little red hat on his dome. I'm just telling you. I'm just saying, if you got any Trump supporting listeners, which I doubt you do, but if you do,
I doubt we do.
And if listeners today, sorry about that.
That's fine. If they are, well, I'm sorry guys, but no, I'm not having it. But yeah, no, it's totally. And I think the one thing I will say is I actually what I do like about the regular cut is that John Strode's death is way more violent in that than it is in the producer.
The head explosion, right?
Oh my God, which is amazing. And I'm like, if anybody's head deserves to explode in a fantastic glory, like it's his. So it's one of those where like, I get the producer's cut. It's like, it's more like, it's pacing. It's like, it's more in line with like what we expect from a Halloween movie, but like regular cut, like the dude is like completely destroyed. And I can't help but respect that, especially for his character, because he deserved that.
He does. But Deborah did not deserve to go out like she did. Her death bothered me so bad in this movie because I'll tell you why, because she did nothing wrong. She wasn't a promiscuous pot smoking teenager. She wasn't a cop. She wasn't a Smith's Grove sanitarium member. She was just there. That's all she was. And as soon as Loomis came to her and told her what went down in the house, she did what you're supposed to do in a horror movie. She grabs a suitcase, calls her bum ass husband, and tells him that she's leaving. She did all the right things. She had her suitcase ready, but she never made it past the laundry in the front yard. She got killed by thick Michael Myers. Yeah. Michael Myers he's much thicker in this movie. His mask is a little wider. He's definitely got a little meat on his bones, which I'm okay with.
we like big beefy Michael Myers. Yes.
We do. We like Michael Myers with man size. We're down with that.
No, definitely. And what I think is interesting too is like, it's sort of one of those things where in horror movies, like you just realize you can't do your laundry in these things because it never works out.
It never does. It didn't work out in My Bloody Valentine, and it didn't work out here.
No, and I think even like Friday 3, I think there was stuff involving laundry at the beginning of that with the couple who owns that little store.
Yeah. Oh man, yeah. They didn't do too well either.
So that's definitely like if there's because I think there's been sort of thing going around on Twitter about like life lessons from horror movies. I think that's one. Like don't worry about your laundry if there's a serial killer lurking about. Mm-hmm. Just leave it. Just go.
Don't worry. Get more laundry later. This movie gets a little confusing as to how Michael is related to the baby in the movie and the Strodes themselves, because it gets very, very convoluted. And I totally see why both Rob Zombie and the filmmakers who did 2018 Halloween just retconned all of that, because it does get very labyrinthian. But in this movie, from what I understand, the Strodes are the family who adopted Laurie, and the house itself is sacred to him. And that Tommy explains that to Michael, anyone living in the Strode house is family. And he explicitly says that in, I believe it's the producer's cut that he says that.
Yeah.
But it's cut from the theatrical. And so he must kill everyone in the family. And so if he sees you as family, you're dead. And that's why Deborah Strode was killed in the movie, despite having done nothing but just standing in the house. And so Jamie's baby is supposed to be his final sacrifice. And that's what I could get from the movie, but it does get a little contradictory here and there throughout the two different versions of the movie.
Yeah. And it's interesting because like for the most part, Friday the 13th kind of stayed within like certain storylines throughout, which, I've always appreciated about it. And for the most part, Nightmare did as well, except for New Nightmare,
Right.
Which was just sort of its own thing. But Halloween like has like all these different sort of like, it's like choose your own adventure. Like, do you want to follow Laurie where, she has a daughter? Do you want to follow Laurie when she ends up having a son? Or do you want to go with the new one where she has a different daughter?
Yeah.
But what really struck me last night, made me feel really old, is like this baby is now 25 years old.
Why did you say that?
I know. And so like, last night I was like thinking about this. I was like, what would a sequel look like now if you picked up with little Steven as Tommy names him? And I love that it's like basically Paul Rudd's middle name.
Yeah.
Because of course, like you're going to name the baby after you. You just saved him.
Yeah.
So what is little Steven's story now? Like if they were to do a Halloween sequel that picked up after 6, I would be really curious to see what that is. Like, did Kara and Tommy like run off and raise this baby together?
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm just so interested. Like, what would that storyline look like? But yeah, it made me feel really, really old. Like this, that this baby could like, now rent a car without any sort of hassle.
Right. This baby pays taxes.
Yeah, it's out of college now, But yeah, I was thinking about it, I was like, oh my God, like we could have a whole new storyline.
You could, because this baby would now be going toe to toe. This grown man would now be going toe to toe with Michael Myers, because technically, if you're going off of the Halloween 6 storyline of the producer's cut, Michael is still compelled to go after this kid because it's the last of his bloodline. And so there are 2 choices here, which were the same 2 choices in the producer's cut, where either you kill off the last of the bloodline or you pass the curse on to another family, another child, which is what he kind of tried to do with the little boy of Halloween 6. There were little voices telling him to kill, which turned out to be the Man in Black and not Michael Myers, as I thought in as a kid. I always thought it was Michael Myers saying, kill her.
Yeah.
It was actually the Man in Black saying that the whole time.
So, you mentioned Danny Strode, which I think is really interesting because, I think there's definitely some parallels between him and Danny from The Shining.
I had never thought about that. Yes. Yeah. He's
little boy who hears voices named Danny.
Yes. Oh my gosh. That was probably like an intentional thing to name him that. But yeah, he was, I know that after the end of Halloween 4 and 5, they were trying to make it in such a way that Jamie would kind of pick up the baton, and that she was supposed to be kind of the new Michael. And then they tried it again with 6, with Danny almost becoming the new Michael. Like Michael and the Cult of Thorn tried to make it so, and it doesn't quite work out for all of them. But I do like the idea of them sort of implying the end of Michael Myers, but also leaving room for another sequel, which all of the slasher franchises had tried to do. You had Freddy's Dead, the final nightmare, was supposed to be the last one. You had in Friday the 13th, there's the final chapter. And of course, these things do fairly well at the box office, and so it's not so final as it seems. And they tried to do what they can to bring that back and retcon it and do whatever kind of mental gymnastics they have to do within the storyline to make it possible for a new sequel to happen. But the cool thing about slasher franchises is that you can kind of do what you want, and people will accept it. I think in Friday the 13th, they had a sequence where lightning struck Jason's grave and he came back. There's another one where I think his chains were electrocuted somehow. I think that happened in Manhattan, in Jason Takes Manhattan.
It was, yeah.
Yeah, his chains were electrocuted somehow, and that brought him back to life. And here, they're kind of working as they go along, and it seems wonky looking back, but all of the slasher franchises were doing that. Freddy's bones were peed on by a dog.
And it was awesome.
And that brought him back, so this was the norm of the time. We like to look back at it and dunk on it now, but it was definitely like, that's what you did. You could do what you want, and audiences would more or less accept it.
Yeah. I think audiences today could take a lot away from where audiences expectations were in the 80s and 90s, because I almost feel like we put so much pressure on movies to deliver what we want out of them these days.
We do.
Where instead of just sitting back and like enjoying the ride, and I'm guilty. We're all guilty of it at some point, but I'm guilty of it as well. But I think like we could take something away from sort of the simple pleasures of, just watching a horror movie and seeing where it goes, as opposed to building up what expectations we might have for it going into it.
Right. And I'm fine with a movie sticking to formula. I'm actually very okay with that. The newest Halloween movie, the 2018 one, a lot of people got upset at that, for so many reasons. But one of them is because it seemed like fan service. Well, I'm that fan. And
Me too.
I'm very much into what Halloween 2018 was selling. I loved every bit of it. I knew the beats and I still had a great time and I was still entertained. And so I think that you have to take that into account when you're coming up with a franchise sequel to something that's been established and beloved by many. But I also respect people trying to do something new and trying to breathe new life into a franchise. So while I didn't like the end result of some sequels, like the Friday the 13th, The New Blood, I didn't like that. I didn't like Carrie versus Jason, but I did respect that they tried to do something new with it and bring a little bit more supernaturalness to it. That's not a word, but I'm making it a word now.
It's totally a word now. Yeah, and it's funny because you mentioned 2018 Halloween, which I'm a huge fan of.
Yes. Okay.
And
this isn't going to be a fight. Great.
No, not at all. And what I think is like really funny to me is like so many people bitched about that movie, about the Dr. Sartain character, which I was like, did you not pay attention to where Loomis was heading? Through these like later sequels. Like for me, everybody thought it was just so stupid and silly to have this doctor, do the things that he was doing. And I was like, well, why? Because like we saw shades of this with Loomis, who was, quote unquote, a beloved fixture of, the original films. Like we all love Loomis, but for this other doctor to do it, everybody was just like, oh, this is not right. This is dumb. And I was like, are you kidding? That was amazing. To see that doctor like raise up and he's wearing Michael's mask. And I was like, oh no, you didn't.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, oh, you are in for it now. I think it's brilliant. And I think, I don't think they get enough credit in that movie for taking these little things that are just little hints of things from other sequels. It's not necessarily from like the first Halloween, but just like the sequels that sort of followed and like sort of expanding on them in a very different way. And like, for me, that's what I was like, yeah, that's what I want out of this movie. I want it to give me things that I know, but give me things that I don't. And then also sort of, tip its hat to things that we love about the series as a whole, which I was like, it gets it done. I'm never going to tell somebody they're wrong if they don't like it. But like for me, it really gave me everything I could have possibly wanted and a bunch of things I didn't even know I knew I needed.
Mm-hmm. It does. And what they did with the doctor character of the new Halloween was they took a logical character, Dr. Loomis, and took him to an illogical conclusion. And I absolutely love that they did that. And they brought it to an extreme, as if they were saying, let's see how far we can take this logic that this character had. Let's see how far we can take his motivation. And they pushed it as far as they could. And I know a lot of people didn't really dig it, but I really appreciated what they were trying to do there. And I think that they achieved what they were going for. I know I'm in the minority and I don't care. You can, Bookish Plinko on twitter.com. You can write your hate mail there. I'm fine with that. I'll block you real quick. But, I'm okay. And I'm comfortable with being right in this one. And I know I'm right in this one. This was a good reimagining of, and continuation of the Halloween spirit, let's say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'm right there with you. So you can send me hate mail, hate tweets as well. And I don't even care. I'll just ignore them, keep going. But sort of back to 6, obviously we have, this family, it's sort of the center of it. And then we have like these peripheral characters. But I have to say sort of one of my favorite sort of assholes in this movie is of course, Barry Sims.
Yes. The shock jock.
Yes.
The Howard Stern avatar. Yes. He is great. In that he's such a douche. And, I love to hate him. That's what it is. And the interesting thing is that his death is treated differently in each of the versions of the film. The In the theatrical version, he he says, I'm going to go to the Strode house. And there's he hangs up the phone, says, we're going to go to the Strode house. We're going to film the radio show there. Big sensationalism. We're going to get a lot of listeners. We're going to get high ratings for this. He hangs up the phone, gets into a van, and he's stabbed by Michael Myers. And that's fine. But in the theatrical version, they cut a very specific pan shot in the movie. There's a Smith's Grove Sanitarium logo on the van that he gets into. And in one version, you can't see that. In the other version, you do see it. And it makes a big difference because it explains that he got into the wrong car and that's why he was killed. Myers happened to be there to stab him, but in one version, it looks like he's kind of waiting there for him, and he's not. What happened was Myers didn't get into his van. He came to Michael Myers. He's an idiot. He's a moron. And he got into the wrong car, and Michael Myers stabbed him. And so when you think about Michael Myers wanting to kill people that are only of his bloodline, only in the Strode house, and you think, well, that's incongruous because this guy was just there. He didn't do anything wrong. No, this guy walked directly into Michael Myers' path, and what happened. That's the rules of the movie. That's how it goes. So that is why these cuts aren't so insignificant, and these different types of producers versus theatricals, they do make a difference in how they are edited, how they are cut, and what they show to the audience.
Absolutely. And I'm really glad you mentioned that because that was in my notes. And so this is why you're here, is because you're on top of it. But I think anybody who's like sort of younger than us, like they're not going to remember like the shock jock movement of the 90s, because like I grew up in Chicago, so we had Man Cow.
Oh, you had, yeah.
Yeah, we had Man Cow. And his whole sort of group of people that he associated with. I think one was named Freak, one was Turd. It was a show.
Yeah, very 90s, yeah.
Yeah, and it's fun because again, it's one of those things where it's like, you can watch this movie now and it doesn't really feel very 90s. I mean, like there's aspects of it, like the music feels 90s, the flannel, the baggy pants, but it's still something that doesn't feel dated to me. But as somebody who grew up during the 90s, there are definitely aspects of this movie where I'm like, this is a 90s movie. So it walks that sort of fine line of like, for those of us who sort of lived it, where we're like, oh, this is a product of its time. But ultimately, like you could watch it now and it's not like you're so thrown off by things feeling so retro, where you really feel like, you're sort of stuck in this like specific time frame.
There are definitely like dated references. Like on the radio show, he talks about how things are changing and that there's gays in the military now, and that he makes a direct Lorena Bobbitt reference. He says, cut off your husband's willy and, you make the front page, and so there's definitely like a couple of dated references, but the movie overall, like you said, doesn't really feel so retro that it's overwhelming and that it prevents you from accessing the themes in the movie.
Yeah, because it's one of those, like, I mean, I will always be in line ready to watch any single movie that like sort of drums up any sort of 80s or 90s nostalgia. That's just who I am. But I do like when movies are sort of more subtle about it, where the movie doesn't exist to be a vehicle for that decade. It just happens to be in that decade. You know what I mean? Because like I've seen some movies lately where I'm like, oh, you're just really trying hard to make this about the 80s to like.
I was going to ask you about like how you felt about those movies that are mostly nostalgia and mostly kind of tapping into that market.
Yeah, there's ones that certainly sort of walk the line. Like I think for like the most part, like something like Summer of '84. I think for me, it's pretty forgivable, because I think for me, what it really captured for me was like the essence of being a kid during that time, where it was like, all you really did at night was like ride around on your bike with your friends, because that's what I did, where it's like, I'm trying to think of like, don't want to like bag in any movie specifically, but there are movies where I've watched, I was like, oh, so this is just about the nostalgia and it's not about anything else. And it kind of bums me out a little bit.
And Stranger Things does this to a degree.
It does.
But I still watch it. I still love it.
Exactly. So, basically it's one of those where I'm like, yeah, I mean, do we need movies set back then? Probably not. But like, I will still watch every single one of them because that's who I am. I'll
also specifically forgive them if they're setting it in that time to avoid having to answer the cell phone question, the internet question, like by circumventing that, by putting these movies in the 80s, I'm totally fine with that, because then you can just focus on the story itself without having to worry about the logistics around it. Well, why doesn't the final girl just call the police or do something on her cell phone in order to disorient the killer? You don't have to deal with that when you're working with a film that's set in the 80s. So that much I do forgive, and I'm totally willing to suspend disbelief just for that reason.
Yeah. Although now it's like cell phones don't get service in certain parts.
Yeah. That's all you have to do now.
Yeah. Which is, it's funny because most of us pretty much just get service anywhere. But I always joke because like, I do a side podcast called Craven, and we were talking about Last House on the Left. And, I recently, like last year when I was driving to Chicago, I ended up having to go off the main highway to try to find gas because I was running out of gas. Like, who does that? And it was like one of those things where I literally did not have a cell phone signal for like an hour and a half. And I was like, wow, I'm really in a horror movie right now because now my phone doesn't work. And I was like, and I always like roll my eyes like during movies. We're like, oh, my phone's not working. And they're like in a major metropolitan area or something. And I was like, well, of course your phone works. And I'm like, yeah, oh no, this really does happen. And I'm living it. So I forgive the cell phone doesn't work scenarios now. I'm like, okay, all right, I get it. Point made.
Yeah. I had a really cheap cell phone for years and years and years. So I totally get that. It's definitely a thing where if you step outside of your house, basically, you're not going to get the roaming that the plan supposedly offered you. You're not going to get service at all, especially if your cell phone is not an iPhone. So it's forgivable. You don't have to worry about any of that in Halloween 6 when cell phones weren't really a thing.
Yeah.
Yet, beepers were a thing, but cell phones weren't really a thing.
We were barely just in the internet days during this movie, which is always fascinating to see Tommy's little computer.
I know. You can see it's so rudimentary. It's adorable.
It really is. I was like, oh, you kids have no idea how good you have it now.
He probably had dial-up. He had that little AOL disc he had to use to get to get onto that little. And it was like the most basic cartoon that he used to most basic animation that he used to explain the nature of the runes and the druid curse that encompassed Michael Myers and compelled him to kill. And I totally get that. The appeal of the original Halloween movie and the second one is that Michael Myers is just pure evil, that he's this almost Lovecraftian monster, this cosmic monster that is evil, but you don't really explain why. And that's the appeal of it. He's just straight up evil. I get that part of the strength of that is that there's no backstory to it. In H6, you're giving him a backstory, and that might ruin it for some people. But for me, as someone who loves cults, who has anxiety and loves seeing other people who have this feeling like there's a conspiracy and everyone's in on it but you, I'm totally down with the idea of half of the townspeople of Haddonfield being in on this weird cult that compels Michael to kill for some ancient druid curse. I'm totally down with that. Absolutely. Yeah.
Definitely. Although one of the aspects of like, cause I love when you find a character who's like super obsessed with things and they have like newspaper clippings all over their wall and they're obviously like into things, which I love that about Tommy Doyle's room. But I always think it's funny that he records things off the radio on a reel to reel machine. Because I'm like, in my day, we just use a cassette.
You just use a cassette. You press play and record at the same time. You got to kind of get the thumb and the pinky like spread out properly. But the boombox, you can get it at the same time. That's how mixtapes were born. You'd record straight off of the radio, and half of the time, some DJ's voice would be, talking in the first 5 seconds of the song that you were trying to play, and you get all annoyed about it. But yeah, he's got this whole setup that I guess they they might have assumed that most people wouldn't know what all that was, and they just thought it was just something really elaborate that Tommy Doyle was really into, and it meant that he was really dedicated to the cause of finding out about Michael Myers, you know?
Yeah, and it looks cool. It's great set dressing. So, you know.
What's cool is that he's definitely a goth because he has a Sisters of Mercy poster on
Yes.
So Tommy Doyle is a goth. That is canon, and it is irreversible. And I don't care if the 2018 movie doesn't acknowledge it. I don't care if any future sequels don't acknowledge it. Tommy Doyle is a goth. He is one of us, and that is that on that.
And eventually Danielle Harris goes on to be a goth for Urban Legends. So
she is like a very visible goth too. So
yeah, she's the goth that tries really hard.
I'm happy that there's a lot of goth crossover with the Halloween and the horror genre in general. And that makes a lot of sense. Of course it does. Just like true crime. A lot of horror people, like the horror circle and the true crime circle is almost a circle itself in the Venn diagram overlap. You know, it's just like, if you watch horror, you probably watch a lot of true crime documentaries. You're probably a goth. You're probably really into The Cure, or you probably have really strong opinions about Joy Division versus New Order. You know, all of those things. So it's nice to see that kind of representation on screen in the form of the ageless Paul Rudd.
It's funny because I've never really considered myself "quote unquote" goth, but I mean I probably went through like a little bit of a phase, but like I definitely think
tendencies.
I do, but I'm like when you said Joy Division versus New Order, I'm like I probably would go Joy Division.
See, we've all got very very strong opinions about which one.
I was like,
we would take with us on Desert Island. Are you going to do Joy Division? Are you going to do New Order? Are you a more pessimistic person, or are you like Molly Ringwald in The Breakfast Club? Are you a little bit more of a princess? You know, it depends. That informs your opinion. It says a lot about. It's a personality test, is what it is. Joy Division versus New Order.
Yeah, definitely. I would really love to see, because I know Tommy Doyle, the character, comes back in. Is it Halloween Kills? Is the next one that we were supposed to be getting in a few weeks, and now we're not. Which is fine. We'll wait. But I would love to see Anthony Michael Hall show up as a goth.
Oh my gosh. Wouldn't that
like there's time for reshoots, guys, if you're listening. I'm just saying, putting it out there.
I mean, they make these brands now of this lip cream makeup. I can't remember what it's called. I think it's called NYC Lingerie. And they make these really, really dark shades of lip color. And I would love to see Anthony Michael Hall in like the blackest of black lip color.
Yes.
Like, yeah. They're not going to do it, but I'm just saying, I'm just putting it out there in the universe. I'm manifesting it that I would love to see a super goth, mega goth, uber goth, Anthony Michael Hall.
I would too. So, as we kind of sort of wrap things up, because I know like you at certain like festivals and stuff, you sort of done like drinking games with movies and stuff. Would this one definitely be centered around the phrase, "Where's the baby"?
Yeah, definitely. You're gonna have to take a drink every time somebody says, "Where's the baby?" Maybe take a shot every time Loomis looks bewildered.
And every time Tommy makes crazy eyes.
Yeah, maybe like chug your drink or something like that. Oh man, you'd be dead by the end of the show.
Yeah, I was gonna do a count of how many times they either say baby or where's the baby, and I was like, wow, I don't know if I could keep up with this. Right. So I got about 20 in last night, and I think I was only in like the first like 25 minutes of the movie, and I was like, all right, we just know it's a lot.
It's a lot, yeah. And what I like about this franchise entirely is that it is one of the few franchises that's named after a specific holiday that actually leans into that holiday very, very heavily, especially in the later sequels with 4, 5, and 6. A lot of their opening sequences are of pumpkins, hay rides, and leaves on the ground, and all of the things that you would associate with Halloween. And the curse itself is directly connected to Samhain, Samhain. It doesn't matter how I pronounce it. Someone's going to tell me I'm wrong.
The festival of Samhain.
Yeah. But I really appreciate that, because when you get to the films, like after Friday the 13th specifically, they had a whole bunch of like April Fool's Day, New Year's Eve, all that stuff that were really just kind of slasher stories that just happened to be on that day. And they weren't really tethered to the holiday itself or the traditions or origins of that holiday. But Halloween is through and through throughout the entire franchise a very Halloween movie that you can really only show in October.
Yeah.
I mean, play it any other time of year. I certainly do, but it's a very Halloweeny holiday. Another word I just made up.
I like Halloweeny. I think there's actually a Halloweenies podcast, so that works. So we just
lovely.
do free advertising for them. So you're welcome, guys.
You're welcome.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. And I think, you know, a lot of folks sort of had a problem with them moving production for these films to Utah, because I know four and 5 were shot in Utah and as well, and 6 as well. But I think for me, because of somebody who, you know, grew up in Illinois, like I know what Halloween and I know what October looks like in Illinois.
Oh, you had true Halloweens.
Yeah. And believe me, as a kid, I was always like, where is Haddonfield? Where is this place? And I was always bummed that I could never find Haddonfield. And so what I like about the fact is they sort of move these to Utah is that at least it gives us a little more texture to the look of Haddonfield. Mm-hmm. You know, it feels rural. It feels very small town. It feels very authentic to what Illinois feels like in October. Although sometimes we have snow, you know, which is always a bummer. Cause I think at one time when I was a kid, like we actually had to wear winter coats to trick or treat because it snowed the day before.
I can't imagine. Southern California native here. Can't imagine.
Yeah, it's weird. It's weird. You know, so it's one of those where I'm like, wow, that's, you know, so it's like, and as much as I love like, you know, the first couple Halloweens, like they don't feel the way I felt growing up in Illinois, watching them. Of course, 3, you know, ends up taking place in California anyway, so it has a different feel. Although we do get those shots of Halloween happening around the country, even though it's very obviously different parts of California. But I still love that, you know, that doesn't really bother me. But I like that, you know, at least by moving it to Utah where you have trees that really actually shed their leaves, you know, in the way that they're supposed to. And it just has that wind and like, it really encapsulates. And I think I would say Halloween 4 is like probably my favorite opening credit sequence to really get into the spirit of Halloween.
Truly. Yeah. And, you know, being in Southern California, and you know this, it's still like, it can get up to the 90s in October. You know, you could be sweating wearing your Halloween costume. It's kind of ridiculous at times. And so it's nice to see these movies that capture the aesthetics and the spirit of Halloween in such a way that we kind of pine for it a little bit. Out in Hollywood, out in LA, out in San Diego, we definitely watch these movies. Like I would love for the temperature to drop 20 degrees in my neighborhood, but it's not going to happen.
No, totally. And I think also too, it's as we're recording, it's like, I think this weekend it's going to be in the hundreds again.
It's ridiculous.
It's the end of September.
It's the end of September and I got the AC on.
Yeah. It's, you know,
wearing shorts.
It's fine. It's fine. Climate change isn't real. It's fine. It's all
I know
fine.
My state is on fire. When it's not shaking and quaking, it's on fire. Sometimes at the same time. It's great. I love it. Wouldn't trade it for a thing.
Yeah, it's true. You know, it's one of those where I'm like, you know, the trade-off is good. It's not, you know, I don't have to go scrape my car in the morning, or I don't have to like deal with like negative 14 degrees wind chills and things like that. So, you know, there is the trade-off.
I will say that I'm not prepared. When I went to visit my boyfriend who lives on the East Coast, and I had stepped off the plane in February.
Oh.
I was not ready for how cold it was. I was like, why are you living in a place where your face hurts from the cold the second you step off the plane? Why do you live here? And I'm sure that he was asking the same thing. Like, why do you live in a place that's on fire 8 months out of the year?
Pretty much.
I mean, you know, you do what you got to do and you acclimate, you know, you get used to it.
No, totally. And I think the one thing that's nice, like as I get winter 1 week a year because of Sundance. So that's kind of helped me sort of like every year that I go back to that festival, it's a little more tolerable where the cold doesn't bother me as much. But that first year I went, like I was wearing like triple socks, like triple.
Right. Yeah. I'm betting I'm betting you're one of the very few Californians to actually have like a nice winter coat and a scarf.
Yes. Like you gotta have it.
Like when my boyfriend was like, okay, you're going to visit in February. It's going to be cold. You're going to need a coat. And I'm like, well, like a hoodie, like a really nice hoodie. Is that what you mean? And he just kind of laughed at me. And I didn't realize that I needed to actually get a scarf and maybe a couple of earmuffs since I'm going to be walking around in the city a little bit in New York. And I had to go order them online because there are no stores around here that sell earmuffs. Like that's not a thing in Southern California, in the Inland Empire, or anywhere near San Diego. They don't have earmuffs. Why would we need earmuffs? It's stupid. So
I know. Even at its coldest, it's like 40 degrees. So you're like, what are you going to do?
So I respect the people who live in the frigid Arctic of the East Coast over there. I totally get it. And I don't envy you. I'd rather my state be on fire. I'm fine with that. Do what we can to put out the fires, and that's it.
Exactly. Well, sort of putting Halloween 6 to bed here, 25 years later, we've been very fortunate that we've had, we were able to go back and sort of rescue this producer's cut, which I do think gives us a lot more to appreciate about this film in general. And I actually think it makes it a stronger film as a whole, even with its sort of weird incestuous aspects of it. For you, looking at this movie and, seeing how it fits into the Halloween universe and everything like that. I mean, if somebody came up to you and they were like, why should I watch Halloween 6? Like, what would be your response?
Oh, it's just so different. It's so different from the rest of the franchise. What Ferrens had said was something along the lines of, it wasn't ever my intention that he was controlled. He always felt that Michael was supposed to actually control the cult, and that it was like the original movie where the television version had said that the staff of Smith's Grove was afraid of Michael, and that they did whatever he wanted them to do. They were at his beck and call. And so Ferrens thought that they almost worshiped him to a degree, and that he was almost kind of a deity to him, which actually speaks to the giant nature that Michael Myers had by this point in the franchise. He pretty much had this by maybe film 4 or 5 of the franchise. But all of these franchises, these slasher franchises, Freddy, Jason, Michael, all you have to say is those 3 names, and people know exactly what you're talking about because these figures have become so big and so much larger than life. And I think that Daniel Ferrens really leaned into that and decided to make a cult-centric sequel that answered your questions about the last movie, leaned into the spirit of the original 2 movies, but also gave you something slightly new. And I really dig that. I really respect it. And for me, it hits all the marks. It hits all my buttons. I am that fan. It may be some kind of fan service, but I am that fan, and I really dig it. And I think that if you're tired of the stale period that horror films entered in the late 80s, early 90s, this film is really one for you. That's a great transition to the screams, the auditions, the films that later came that made the slasher franchise what we now know it as. That's been completely revamped. This was that transitional gateway film that got you to where you love slasher films today.
No, absolutely. And I think also too, I think there's, it's funny. I think in some ways, like the cult aspects is almost like reflective of horror fandom in a way, where we sort of come to revere these figures who are actually, they're evil bad guys. But because we're so blindly loyal to them, we will follow them anywhere. So I think ultimately in our heart of hearts, regardless of how you feel about Halloween 6 in particular, I think we all belong to the Cult of Thorn.
Mm-hmm. We all want to resurrect him. We all want to bring him back time and time again in order to sort of comfort us in a way and bring us back to where we were as kids when we first saw that one slasher movie, be it Halloween, be it Friday the 13th, be it Hellraiser, whatever it was, that one slasher movie that really got you and hooked you and said, this is the movie for you. This is where I belong, this little horror genre here. This brings you back to that. And so it makes sense that you would worship him. And this film, again, leans into that. Take a drink every time I say leans into that in this podcast.
We'll turn this into the Corpse Club drinking game too. Well, Anya, this has been really, really super fun for me. And I'm so glad we were able to do this. And I really appreciate you taking the time to talk about Halloween 6. Like I said, I told you when I reached out, I was like, there is nobody else that I would want to talk about Halloween 6 with. So I really appreciate you doing this today.
I appreciate that you saw all of my rambling tweets about this movie and decided, yes, this is the person I want to come talk about this. I appreciate that.
I think we all have those movies that we're so connected to that, like, you know, not that we don't appreciate when other people talk about them, but if I were to do this podcast with somebody else, I'd be like, you know, be like, oh, but Anya's going to get so mad that I didn't reach out to her. Like, you know, I get like super offended if like somebody's out there talking about Point Break or something. And I'd be like, I'm right here. What are you doing? Like, I'm right here. Talk to me.
Talk to me.
Yeah.
I have plenty to say on the subject. Absolutely.
So yes.
I wouldn't have been offended, but I would have definitely looked at it twice. Like, I mean, I'm your subject matter expert here. I've watched this movie.
Like, bitch, what are you doing? Like, I'm right here.
I appreciate it.
No, it's been awesome. If you want to let people know, like, so where can they find you to kind of reach out, follow your work, follow you, and all that kind of stuff?
So I have my hands in many different pots, as I said at the beginning of the podcast, but you can mostly find me on Twitter at Bookish Plinko. That's bookish as in someone who reads a lot, and Plinko as in the Price is Right game. I might have been wine drunk when I made up that name. I don't know, but I'm
glad you explained that because I've always wondered.
I think I was wine drunk. I don't remember, but I've got enough followers that I can't go back and change it now. So it is what it is. Yes, I'm Bookish Plinko on Twitter. You'll find me defending Halloween 6 and Alien 3 all the time, and Dr. Giggles too. And on my website, anyawrites.com, that's a place where I update it fairly often, and you can keep track of all my clips at all the places that I write for: Fangoria, Dread Central, Rue Morgue, Crooked Marquee, Vague Visage, anywhere I write for. If I'm talking horror, I will link it to that website, and that's the best place to find me.
Excellent. And for those of you who've been listening to Corpse Club over the years, thank you so much for your support. For those of you who are sort of new to Corpse Club, you can find us over at corpseclub.com. And for all your daily news and reviews and interviews, you can head over to dailydead.com as well. It's a huge thank you to our engineer, Brian, for doing our editing and making us sound awesome.
Thank you, Brian.
And yes. And until next time, everybody, relax your crack and stay scary.